king who talked with trees. Known as Farmer George for his love of rural life and America's last king for losing the Revolutionary War, King George III could well have been his royal majesty. So let's begin. A fine start. George III became King of England in 1760 at age 22 after his grandfather George II died from an aneurysm. Young George's father Frederick, who would have been heir to the throne, had died when the prince was 12. George III and his queen Charlotte had 15 children, and they became known for their model family life. To the chagrin of his family and other proper upper-class folks, George enjoyed many hobbies that were considered eccentric for a royal. Keenly interested in agriculture, he spent much time constructing and supervising model farms. He collected books, approximately 65,250, and tinkered endlessly with watches and other small gadgets. His subjects found these common traits endearing, but neither they nor the upper crust could have imagined the fate of their modest and generous leader. Monarch madness. Although he was a healthy devotee of exercise and simple food, George had his first mental breakdown in the fall of 1788 when a page observed him involved in a heated discussion with a tree. At other times, George would incoherently and incessantly babble. After he started foaming at the mouth, doctors bled him, put him in a straitjacket, and covered him with smelly, hot compresses that were designed to draw out evil substances. Despite the archaic 18th century medical practices, he miraculously recovered in about a year. However, George's illness returned in 1811 after the death of his favorite daughter Amelia, who had succumbed to tuberculosis. Then 72, George began acting with such dreadful excitement that the mad doctor had to be called back to the castle. The king continued to suffer frequent delusions, often declaring that Princess Amelia was alive and living in Germany. Eventually, his aides had to bring out restraints again. George barely escaped a proposed shock treatment of being doused with buckets of cold water. His son, the future George IV, ruled in his father's stead as the official Prince Regent of Great Britain. King George spent the last 10 years of his life wandering in an enclosed area of Windsor Castle in a purple robe, blind and eventually deaf, his royal jewelry pinned to his chest. Some of his later delusions were that God had sent a second flood similar to Noah's, and that he himself was dead. Eventually, he was so far removed from reality that he didn't know that his wife had died in 1818. The king quietly passed away in his bed in 1820 at age 81. That's pretty good for 1820. Why the weirdness? Two doctors, Ida McAlpine and Richard Hunter, published an article in 1966 claiming that George III actually suffered from a complex of genetic disorders called porphyria, a medical condition that was not recognized in the monarch's time. Porphyria causes the blood to make too much red pigment, which affects the entire nervous system and brain and can cause a wide variety of symptoms, including bizarre behavior. In 2003, an envelope containing a few strands of hair from George III was found buried in a London museum. Specialists tested the hair and found that the king's medicine contained high levels of arsenic, as much as 300 times the toxic level, which could have poisoned him and brought on the porphyric attacks. Ironically, the medicine was prescribed by the mad doctor who was simply trying to cure the very illness he was creating.